Hello and welcome to Walking Digital Corridors, where we navigate the modern sales landscape, cutting through the noise and unlocking real, impactful conversations. If you're in sales, you already know there is no easy button, but with the right insights, you can walk these digital corridors with more confidence. So in today's episode, we're joined by Michael Pearson, an expert in procurement who has helped countless sales teams engage more effectively with one of the most critical stakeholder groups in any deal. Michael's deep understanding of procurement has transformed the way sales teams approach this function, turning what many see as an obstacle into an opportunity. So today we'll build upon the discussion that we had last time when Michael appeared on Sales TV and explore fresh insights on how to align more effectively with procurement, uncover the real priorities, and secure better outcomes for all parties involved. Hello, Michael. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you, Alex. Delighted to be here.
Good to see you again. Good to see you again. So I find this a really interesting topic. So someone like myself that spent 30 years in sales, 25 years in B2B sales, I've experienced procurement many times on different occasions. Always tried to avoid them if I could, or at least have a strong sponsor that could help to mediate, as it were. But tell us a bit more about yourself. Your career in procurement, and why are you now doing what you're doing?
Yeah, so I guess I am what you'd call a career procurement person. My very first job after graduating was a supplies management trainee with London Regional Transport, that back in those days ran the buses and the tubes and just the tubes and the buses in London. And then worked my way up across different sectors, FMCG, financial services, professional services, worked my way up from trainee to buyer to senior buyer. And then I guess the last 15, 20 years of my career in procurement leadership roles. About a year ago, I left corporate life. I realized that there was actually a very big demand for me and my knowledge from sales teams who really, as you said in your introduction, were really keen to try and understand and get inside the procurement mind. So that's what I now do.
Nice. Well, congratulations for making that step into the entrepreneurial world. And I have to say, I think the service or the support that you offer is invaluable, because many of us in sales have never formally been trained or advised on how to engage with procurement. Now, first topic of the day, price. So many salespeople assume procurement's top concern is price, but we know it's more nuanced. Can you perhaps break down the true hierarchy of priorities in procurement decision making?
I mean, there's no denying price is uppermost in our minds, not least of all because almost all procurement people and teams are going to have a savings target that are expected to achieve. So not surprisingly, we are very focused on price. Yeah. But of course, you're quite right. There are many other factors. I think if perhaps sort of list perhaps 3 or 4 of those top factors that I typically see, first and foremost, and above all else, is of course quality. And I mean quality in the broadest sense. Does the quality of the product or service meet at least a minimum acceptable level? Will ongoing support be of the right quality? Does the company itself have quality of experience, depth of expertise, and so on? So that's kind of a given. Third-party risk management, increasingly important. Procurement people are concerned about the financial stability, reputational risk, and of course with digital solutions, particularly cyber and information security measures. ESG or sustainability, increasingly important to procurement people. And the last one I'd mention is cultural fit, which can cover a wide range of things, from things such as what's the relative size of me as a customer to you as the supplier, all the way through to do we actually get on with people. But actually, it's a very, very important factor, because in an age where a lot of sectors have matured to the extent there are a lot of very good quality vendors offering very good quality solutions, assuming the price might not be a major differentiator, actually that cultural fit very often is that crucial last factor that makes the decision.
Right. Interesting. I never would have thought procurement would care too much for culture. But
we do like to think that we are objective and not subjective. But we have all sat in so many presentations, so many engagements with suppliers, and there are some of those engagements where they're saying the right things, but it just doesn't really gel.
yeah,
And then there's others where it just all comes together, and you just think, yeah, you know what? These are the people we can work with.
yeah. Okay, so that's even the feeling that you're getting from the people.
It is, and you know, when I'm talking to sales teams, I joke that it's a little bit like going on a date. You know, you can wear your best suit, you can wear the right aftershave or perfume, but you can't guarantee it's going to work. It's kind of either there or it isn't. I mean, there are some basic do's and don'ts. You know, keep to timings, keep your in jokes to a minimum. Don't get upset by the annoying person on the client side whose job it is just to disrupt you and throw your proposal in the bin ostentatiously. But apart from managing those type of activities, as any salesperson will probably tell you, it's either there or it's not.
Yeah. Do you sort of plan to have one of those people, those awkward people in the room when they're doing it?
I don't. And I've not had too many of them on my side of the fence, but I've spoken to plenty of salespeople who have had them. They've all got a tail, and I think the more experienced you are, the more you come to realise that, first of all, that's just the role they enjoy playing.
Yeah.
It's not personal. They're probably doing it with all potential suppliers, and you know what? They're probably thought of by their own colleagues as being something of an idiot. So, you know, you just have to move on and not get too upset by it.
Yeah. I listened to a roundtable discussion this morning. Little bit off piste here, but it's relevant. I listened to a roundtable discussion this morning. There was a procurement guy talking about the RFP process, and he was talking about, and this was with CRO Connected. It's a community that I'm part of. He was talking about the fact that if there's so much choice available, there might have been a short list or a short long list, let's say, but if there is so much choice available where the supplier is almost a commodity, then his attitude would typically change and even be somewhat sort of combative, because there's no need for procurement to work with the organization, as it were. Is that something you've experienced?
I no, I wouldn't say so.
Okay.
Not least of all, assuming you're entering into a partnership with this supplier that's going to last some time, and whilst procurement might just do the deal at the beginning and then never be involved again, nevertheless, you do want to start the relationship on a reasonably positive footing. Now, of course, you can be combative, and you can do that in a way that leaves somebody respecting you rather than disliking you. So I think if it's done in the right way, possibly it can have the right effect. But no, I'm not sure I fully recognise that.
Okay. Well, that's good to know. I'm triangulating all of this feedback to get a really true picture. Okay, so what are some of the signals that indicate procurement might be more open to collaboration versus just running a process, a linear stepped process?
I think there's probably two things that come to mind. One is, how much access do you, as the salesperson, have to the relevant business area, so you can truly understand their needs and their pain points and so on. Now that access could happen prior to an RFP process, at which point you therefore get no more contact, but at least you've had lots of initial ones. Or it could happen during the process, or indeed both. If you don't get that access, and it's very much an attitude of, you've got our requirements on paper, that's as much as you're going to get, then that for me would be something of a signal. And then I think the second thing is, to what extent does the RFP make clear that the client is open to other suggestions, other ideas? It's quite a common complaint I get from salespeople, is that the RFP is very prescriptive in how they want the solution to look. And the client is quite frustrated because they can see that actually there may be a better way to achieve the same outcome. Now, without being too stereotypical, private sector probably is more likely to be open to those alternatives. Public sector, and I know this is a sweeping statement, but sometimes a little bit more closed because they want to be a bit more prescriptive. They don't want to run the danger of going off piste and allowing other factors, other issues to come into play. So it can be a little bit harder then. So that would be a second signal that perhaps the procurement is just running the process rather than being truly collaborative to get to the right outcome for their organization.
Yeah. I know from the sales side of the house, I wasted far too much time in the early years responding to RFPs where we weren't engaged prior, and just accepting that we couldn't engage with anyone when the clock started, the official RFP process started, because often it would say in the RFP, the request for proposal, under no circumstances should you talk to anyone within the business. Yep. And then later realized in my career, actually, my time is valuable, my company's time is valuable. Therefore, if we haven't had prior engagement and the RFP hasn't been created with us in mind, bearing in mind we're not the only person, never the only person in an RFP or entity in an RFP, and would always challenge the thinking within an RFP and speak with business stakeholders, let's say, if we weren't already. And actually, if we couldn't, then if we couldn't speak to someone, if we couldn't understand their thinking as to why the RFP was written in the way that it was, we would qualify out. And that was,
sorry, go on. You finish.
Well, I was just going to say that, and that was because the numbers told us that we would only win 1 in 10, 1 in 20 as time went on, actually.
Yeah. And I absolutely recognise that. And I guess you've got two scenarios. One is where your market intelligence picks up that actually none of your competitors have been able to speak to the business. But then that brings into question, how do you really know that this RFP is what the organisation wants? So that brings dangers. The second scenario is where your intelligence tells you maybe they've got an incumbent. You do know that a couple of other people have been allowed to speak to the business, but then the RFP lands on your desk and you're not allowed that. That would suggest that you're making up the numbers. Good orthodoxy says it's got to be between 3 and 6. They've got 2 or 3 that they really want to have in. You're making up the numbers. And I think you're completely right. If you're having to make hard decisions on which RFPs to go along with, then yes, they were the ones you drop.
Yeah. So if we then think about the process itself, and sales teams or salespeople are attempting to build relationships within the organization. Maybe they haven't done that yet prior, to the RFP process or the formal process where procurement is typically involved. What are some of the common mistakes that sales reps are making when trying to engage other stakeholders, including procurement?
Well, if we take procurement first of all, it's interesting that you said earlier on that you would almost actively avoid procurement if you could, and I recognise for a lot of salespeople, the conversation is going well with the relevant business area. You find out there's a procurement department going to be involved, and the salesperson's heart sinks and thinks, "Oh God, well, okay, I'll cross that bridge when I need to." I would strongly advise to be proactive and reach out. I think for two reasons. One is if you're already having a conversation with the business, which you're hoping is going to lead to a contract, well, procurement are going to be involved somewhere down the line, so engage with them sooner. If you're not having any conversations anywhere in the business or not getting anywhere, actually procurement could be your best friend, because most procurement departments do see it as their role to introduce new suppliers into the business. We're always wanting to add value to our stakeholders, and we want to promote competition and a good review of the marketplace. So it could be your best friend. Right. What I would say is, if you're speaking to someone in the business and you hear there's a procurement person, so you then approach them, there are ways to do that and ways not to do that. So my key advice is certainly not to be presumptuous that you're on a train to getting business and, hey, procurement, you may as well just get on that train. You've got to remember that procurement people, we hate being late to the party. We hate being involved late, and we hate there being no competition. So any procurement person, and I know this because I've happened to me hundreds of times, we are cynical. When a salesperson contacts us and says, been speaking to David in IT, conversation's going quite well, we're immediately thinking, okay, and what stories have you been spinning? What ridiculous pricing have you been putting in front of them? I think the best way, and you're never going to entirely overcome that, but I think if your approach is along the lines of, been speaking to David in IT, discussions are going well, but absolutely understand there's a procurement process to follow, understand you have a key role to play in that, would really just want to introduce myself, understand a bit more about the process, and perhaps you could let me know if there's anything you'd like from me at this stage. It's polite, it's almost being humble, it's buttering me up, it's not being presumptuous. I'm not saying it'll always work, but at least you've got a fighting chance that procurement are going to be more disposed to you than if you weren't making that approach.
Yeah, you are human, of course, at the end of the day.
It's said so, yes.
Yeah. So, and I guess this also it's also important to consider. Is this a salesperson that is just doing net new business? Is this perhaps a salesperson that is selling into the same account multiple times, different products, so might be engaging with procurement for different reasons over a longer period of time, versus someone that is an account manager or customer success manager that perhaps needs to deal with procurement within the same business regularly? Now, taking those three scenarios, I guess the first one, you would think, well, at what point should I engage procurement? And if a salesperson is operating, let's say, a defined territory of a certain number of accounts, 20, 30, 50 accounts, would you be open to outreach from a salesperson prior to any RFP being tabled or thought of? Or is that not the done thing? That's a waste of time.
I mean, okay, so no one likes a cold call. And and it actually quite annoys me, because I can guarantee if you get 10 procurement people in a room, within 5 minutes they'll start complaining about cold calls. And I say that annoys me, because we like to think we're the gatekeepers, and we get annoyed when we're late to the party, and the business starts to talk to suppliers without us. So I don't hold with that. A good professional procurement team should appreciate approaches, should be able to say, obviously, if you have an incumbent in place, should be able to say when perhaps the next review is, the next RFP. If it's a completely new solution that we don't simply have at the moment, then at least they should know the relevant team to put you in touch with. What I would say is that not all procurement departments are as systematic in keeping a log and track of all those suppliers, potential suppliers, as sales teams might like to think. So when you come to do an RFP, typically what happens, there'll be maybe a couple of really strong market leaders that no RFP would be complete without those. And then you're looking for others. And very often, and it is the way of the world and it's human nature, you often go with, well, who's made the most recent contacts? The most recent contact with procurement or the stakeholders. So whenever I'm talking to sales teams, I do say to them, if you ring a procurement person in March and you're told there's going to be an RFP in September, don't sit back and think, well, okay, I've made my pitch. They know about me. I'll expect to be on the RFP in September. Because if there's been another half a dozen of your competitors who've made approaches in between, they'll be uppermost in people's minds. It's not always as systematic as you might think. Long-winded way of saying there is absolutely no harm in making contact, because at the bare minimum, your supplier name will be lodged in the procurement person's mind. And it's just, again, human nature. We just like a bit of familiarity. They're not a complete unknown quantity.
Yeah. Interesting. So procurement should, in your view, like we, salespeople often view the world through account planning and account plans and mapping stakeholders within each account. And so your view would be to ensure procurement is one of those stakeholders that is engaged early, and a relationship, an attempt at least to form a relationship is made.
But exactly. But as part of that account planning, what I'd strongly suggest to salespeople is that they attempt to find out just what is procurement's role and how influential are they. Now, clearly, you need to be subtle about that, because there are some organizations where procurement are extremely powerful. They have a major say in who the successful vendor is going to be. There are plenty of others where it's the business who hold the budget, who are accountable for the relevant service. They are all powerful. Procurement essentially is running the process to get them to that vendor. They'll do the final negotiation, but actually they don't have a major say in who the vendor's going to be. And so that's why I would advocate, and as I say, you need to be subtle, but I think with the right questioning, you can probably tease out from your relevant contacts and your account planning just how is procurement viewed.
Yeah. Okay. So thinking about negotiation and the role of procurement when it comes to negotiation, I've had some of my own very difficult experiences with procurement when 95% of the engagement to that point has been pretty good, and then the wind is kind of just beaten out of the sails, or that's how it feels. Now you as procurement, you don't really care about how the salesperson feels. You have a mandate to achieve a certain objective within the organization. What are some of those objectives? I know we've touched on price a little bit, but when it gets to the negotiation, it isn't just about price, although it's important.
No, I mean, there are other factors. I mean, clearly, Well, first of all, you've got price, and you can broaden that to all commercial aspects, including the price escalators going forward, the cost of support, beyond the headline cost.
Yeah.
Obviously, you've got the contract with everything from SLAs to limitations of liability, and so on and so on. But I do find that when I'm talking to salespeople about the pain of negotiation with procurement, it tends to be the price that really is the emotional subject.
Yes.
There's no
You know
getting
why
away.
that is, don't you, Michael? Because their commission is tied to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where I guess our interests are almost diametrically opposed, because the salesman is trying to get as high a price as he can for his own personal commission and also for overall profitability of his organization.
Yeah.
We in procurement, of course, are trying to do the opposite. I make no bones about the fact that in any negotiation I had, it was my personal mission to get the lowest price I could out of you, to the point where you were walking away, to the point where tales were told within your organization, we've never gone that low before. And I make no bones, that was my personal mission. And people sometimes say, well, were you not worried that the quality might be impacted? And it's a fair challenge. I guess I would always take it on trust that a sales team ultimately would not go beyond a price that they knew they couldn't actually deliver the service on. So if you take the starting point that I'm always going to try and get your lowest price, procurement people, we actively enjoy the negotiation process. We are never, ever going to believe that the first price you give is your lowest price.
Even if it's been negotiated to that point, you always believe there's some more to go.
Well, if procurement had not themselves been involved in it, then yes. If a business area said to me, you don't need to negotiate any further because I've already beaten them up on price, I think, well, that's great. But yeah, I'd be cynical. And probably I've come across plenty of stakeholders. I should say most procurement stakeholders don't enjoy negotiating, and they're very upfront about it. They don't enjoy it and are happy to leave it to us. But of course, there are people out there in the business who do actively enjoy it and will often tell me what a fantastic job they've done without being too cynical. I think often the reason they believe they've got a good job is because the salesman's told them, oh, you took the shirt off my back. And actually, when you look at the deal, the headline price might be pretty good, but then you get under the hood and you realize that you're being screwed on maintenance charges or professional services, or there's a 5% escalator every year, whatever it might be. So to answer your question, I would certainly always believe that there's still something to be negotiated. And of course, that I appreciate that gives salespeople a dilemma in an RFP, because you've got to be competitive enough that you're going to be on the shortlist and not blown out at the first attempt. But equally, you've got to leave enough fat there, because if you don't, it sounds really silly, but you're going to upset procurement. Procurement will just not believe you if you were to say, I'm sorry, as an RFP, we've absolutely given you the best price. There is no more to be given. I mentioned earlier, all procurement people have a savings target. There's reams been written about how savings are actually calculated, whether it's hard or soft, and what's allowable. But putting that all to one side, it's by negotiation that we very often make most of our savings targets. So if a supplier simply says, that's it, there's no more to give, you got my best price straight away, you're going to upset procurement, unfortunately.
Yeah. And your savings target, this is a target you would have as a procurement lead within a business, is it?
Yeah. I mean, typically there would be a departmental target, and that would be then cascaded down to individual procurement people. Interestingly, it is relatively unusual for that savings target to then be shared by the relevant business area. Now, that's something
Right.
I actually feel very strongly about, because if IT or HR or marketing, whoever it is, are essentially getting the same budget as they had last year, let's say, but I in procurement have got a savings target of £5 million, you can see straight away I'm potentially on a bit of a collision course with my stakeholder, or at the very minimum, at the very least, we're not necessarily completely aligned. I'm a strong believer of having savings targets baked into departmental budgets, and then they see procurement as the team that can help them to achieve that. But in
Yeah.
my experience, that's relatively rare.
Okay.
Maybe not if you're buying commodities, it's slightly different. Procurement people are likely to be asked during the budgeting round, what's your view of commodity pricing in the coming year, and you price that in. But certainly where it is more indirect spend, which is predominantly what you have in financial services, professional services organizations, very often procurement aren't involved in the planning round. So over here, you've got the business being given big sums of money, being provocative. And over there, you've got a savings target being put into procurement's objectives, and they aren't really aligned.
Right. So if there's a situation which happens often where a supplier is replacing an incumbent, if you can structure your pricing so that from an IT perspective, because there might be a combination of different types of products and services being provided, but let's say you could demonstrate that the IT cost was lower than what they were spending, that would be a big tick against your IT savings target. Is that how it
Yes.
works? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
But
it's more
then,
about, yeah.
but in reasonably sophisticated organizations, the finance director will be saying, that's great procurement. You've chalked up and you've claimed £100,000 saving. So therefore, I'm going to reduce the IT budget by £100,000. Therefore,
Right.
I make sure that that saving absolutely hits the bottom line. That is likely to upset IT.
Yeah.
So you can then see
Okay.
how it's a very fraught area.
Yeah, yeah. And my questioning is really coming from a perspective that is there a unique piece of insight there that as a sales team we need to know about so that we can tailor our approach to that and therefore differentiate ourselves against the competition?
Well, I certainly think if you at least understand procurement, we're never going to believe your first quote, and they are conditioned. And you know what? Even without a savings target, procurement people's mentality is just in our DNA to want to negotiate and get the best price. I think most people probably understand that. I do think on a practical level, if you can get a good enough rapport with the procurement person where you can have that conversation, which almost is along the lines of, what is your personal objective in this? How can I help you to achieve your target? There are some very simple ways. For example, if you are giving away a freebie or value add as part of your proposal or in negotiations, ascribe a dollar or pound value to that, because that can make it easier for procurement to claim it as a bona fide saving. There you go. It's in the proposal. Here are some value adds that are worth £50,000, and I'm going to claim them. There's little things like that you can do. I was talking to a salesperson at a conference late last year, and he told me a really interesting story of how, through conversations with the procurement person, he actually restructured the timing of the deal to help the procurement person achieve their objective. It must have been straddling over 2 financial years or something like that. Didn't impact his organization, didn't impact the buying organization, but it personally helped the procurement person involved. And I don't think I've ever had any salesperson ever acknowledge or recognize that I've got my own target and maybe he or she could help me in some way.
Wow.
You
That
need to
sounds,
build rapport to do that,
yeah.
and that going back right to what I said at the beginning, building up that early positive vibe or impression with procurement is all laying the foundations for sometimes having even more open conversation.
Yeah, and I think we've really got to the kind of the crux of it for me, which is at the end of the day, sales is people buying from people, and if there is no rapport and there is no degree of trust between buyer and seller, then you're missing a significant opportunity to reach that place where there's an agreement, a commitment to work together. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
the last piece I always cover in my training sessions with sales teams is what are the topics at the top of people's minds, procurement people's minds, and it's things like, why don't we have a seat at the top table? Why are we not valued? AI, third-party risk, sustainability. And when I speak to salespeople and say, why should you be interested in this? I tell them, if any salesperson had ever sat down over a coffee and asked me my view on these things, I would have been seriously impressed. Impressed that they weren't just talking about themselves and their product, and they were asking me a question, and the fact that they knew these were the kind of things that procurement people are interested in. I encourage salespeople on LinkedIn to follow procurement people in the same way as I now follow salespeople. I'm learning so much. If you just follow one or two procurement thinkers, you will know the kind of subjects that are getting spoken about and drop them into those little conversations you're having with procurement. It will help build rapport.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, Michael, it's lovely to see you again. I wish you every success in your ventures, your business ventures.
Thank you.
Unless there's anything else you have on your mind that you want to share with us, a final parting thought.
I suppose the final parting thought is don't shy away from procurement. Be proactive. They can be your friend. And if they're not your friend, at least you're going to be on the front foot rather than the back foot.
Brilliant. And where can people find you if they want to engage with you and learn how to engage with procurement?
Yeah, so my organization is called Inside the Procurement Mind, www.insidetheprocurementmind.com, or michael.pearson@insidetheprocurementmind.com.
Fantastic.
Or on LinkedIn, of course.
Of course. Well, have a lovely weekend. And
thank you.
Until next time, everybody, have a great rest of the week. Take care. Bye.